Let's go.
Let's go. Oh,
Do you want to?
sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Don't say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have rage issues.
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where, sometimes we have to talk about problematic people and the sort of good stuff that I don't know. I got nothing. I don't know how to talk about this. I'm Karen Peterson, joined by Lauren Humphreys Brooks.
I was going to say, just like, you think this week is going to be strange, just wait until next week.
Yeah.
Because we're going to, yeah. So, hi, Karen.
Hi, how are you?
I am waking up in a New York City that has elected its first Muslim mayor. And not only that, like, he's actually if he does even half of the things that he's promised to do, it will be very exciting. I am very excited.
I mean, if he does any of the things he promised to do, that would put him above pretty much all the recent mayors you've had, right?
I mean, yes and no. I think that in a lot of ways, like, Eric Adams has actually done the things that he promised to do, which is not good.
Yeah.
But, props to him for we were like, you're the worst, and he proved himself to be the worst. So fuck you, Eric Adams, and fuck you, Andrew Cuomo. Go fuck off back to, like, Long Island or wherever the fuck you live, because you don't actually live in New York City. And son of a bitch, I saw, like, a video from before the election, but I saw a video where he turns right on red in Manhattan. And in New York State, it's legal to turn right on red. In New York City, it is not. And the reason for that should be pretty obvious, because it would be insane, right? But he turns right around, just like, you don't live here. You do not live in this fucking city. You do not know how to drive in New York.
Oh my gosh. I did have an interesting conversation with one of the managers from work this week about New York and the geography of New York, which I feel like I understand much better now than I did 6 months ago. Thanks to you. And anyway, she grew up in Staten Island, but she did not know, and I educated her with a map and everything. She did not know that Brooklyn and Queens are on the island that is Long Island, but are not Long Island.
Yeah. There's Brooklyn and Queens, and then there's Long Island, and it's part of the same landmass. All of it is part of the same landmass. People are surprised that Brooklyn and Queens are on the same landmass, actually, because it feels like they shouldn't be, but they are. And yes, and that entire landmass is in fact Long Island, but it's not Long Island.
Right.
That's the way that it works.
She thought they were a separate landmass, and even though she grew up there, and so I got to teach her the geography of New York.
Granted, like, I've lived here now, so I've lived here for 10 years. I've lived here for several years before that when I was at NYU. And there's still some times where I'm like, where the fuck am I? And how do I leave? And how do I get out of here? Like, there are places, past couple of weeks, I've been places in Brooklyn. I'm just like, are we sure that this is Brooklyn? So yeah, I went out to Queens the other weekend, and I was like, I don't recognize this as being Queens, but okay, I'll believe you.
Well, congratulations to New York City. Congratulations to the newly elected former roommate governors of Virginia and New Jersey.
Yes.
Congratulations to California. Like, it was a big week.
It was.
This very random, totally off cycle election was huge and important. And I think it did a lot of good for a lot of people.
It really, really did. And I do have to say, in really, like, considerably smaller, but still important, I think, New York news, Onondaga County, which is the county that Syracuse, New York is a part of, flipped their legislature, their county legislature, from deep red to blue for the first time in 50 years.
Wow.
And I'm saying right now, Central New York is very conservative. It is, there are liberal pockets and everything, and I think Syracuse is kind of part of that. But there are all of these counties, including the county that I come from, that are just very, very conservative. They've been dyed-in-the-wool conservative for a very long time. The fact that they did that is really amazing, and it says something about, I think, the state of the country and how people are really feeling.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, and sorry, I mean, we didn't mean to turn this into a whole political conversation, but it's funny because, I mean, I've talked pretty openly about how I grew up very Republican, and it was 2016 was where I finally was just like, what has happened here? And I started to really see, I know some things, I recognize that some things were always there, and I just didn't see them until I was out. But I've also just seen major shifts that I am not comfortable with, cannot live with, and in that side. But the thing is that it's funny because there's this assumption that I just flipped and became a Democrat, and I didn't. I'm registered no party preference. I have voted for Democrats in the last couple of elections and will probably continue to do so for the foreseeable future. But I think there's a lot of people in the country that are kind of where I'm at, where it's like, I'm here to vote for the candidate I think will, if not do the most good, at least do the least bad. And I think that's why you're starting to see some of these flips, because it's just so, like, the party became unrecognizable, and there's a lot of us that just can't support it, and we are doing what we have to do to make sure that we send that message that you can't keep going like this. You can't keep ruining people's lives and calling it, Christian and God's will. You can't do that.
No, definitely. Well, I mean, and even if you look at the New York mayoral election, it really was not between a Democrat and a Republican. It was a Democrat and a former Democrat. He was running in as an independent, but someone who's absolutely in Trump's back pocket and was being funded by millionaires and billionaires. They lost so much money. It's so funny. And everything, like the Islamophobia, the transphobia, like everything. This was coming from, Cuomo, who 10 years ago we would have been like, oh yeah, he's sort of a middle of the road Democrat. But this is what he was espousing at this point. And long-term Democratic family, political dynasty, right? And that's what this was down to. It wasn't between Mamdani and Curtis Sowa. It was between Mamdani and Cuomo, and Mamdani trounced him.
Pretty decisively.
Pretty decisively. Yeah, it was not really a contest. Although I did look at the returns from Staten Island, and no, we're not happy with Staten. I mean, it's to be expected. Staten Island is known as very conservative, but you kind of look at it, be like, what are you doing here? Why are you here? You shouldn't be here.
Yeah. Well, enough talk about New York. Let's talk about L.A.
Let's talk about L.A. in the 1990s/1950s.
Yeah. So this whole month, all of the noirs that we've selected, they're actually all more modern movies. And by that I mean they're not set in the time that they're representing. So, like last week we talked about Devil in a Blue Dress, which came out in 1995 and was about 1940s LA. This week we're talking about L.A. Confidential, which came out in 1997 and is set in 1953-54. So it's like right at that holiday season as the year is turning. And L.A. Confidential. So this is based on, it's adapted from a novel by James Ellroy of the same name, directed by Curtis Hanson. And Curtis Hanson has had an interesting career. Sorry, he has passed away. But he directed, but prior to LA Confidential, some of his best known movies were The Hand That Rocks the Cradle in 1992 and The River Wild in 1994. These are thrillers. They're like really just these popcorn movies about just like badass women, one of which is terrorizing an entire family, the other is saving her family. Yeah, and so LA Confidential is this interesting shift, I think, in his career. And he goes on after this to do a film a couple years later called Wonder Boys. He also directed 8 Mile. Like he's just he had a very strange filmography that it kind of like what you see from directors of the olden days, you know, where they're kind of just contracted by the studio and they'll do a musical and then this like hard-boiled detective drama, you know. So I feel like that's kind of Curtis Hanson's career too. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
No, I was because I'd heard the name Curtis Hanson, but then I was looking him up actually this morning, and yeah, it's just like it's like an odd combination of things. He also did like The Bedroom Window, right? Which was on, I watched it on Criterion last year, was part of their neo-noir collection, which is this very kind of well-made but very scuzzy sort of neo-noir. And actually thinking about that with like The Bedroom Window, and he was a writer on a number of other films, including White Dog, which was had originally been, this was in the 1970s, had originally been intended for Roman Polanski, but legal troubles prevented him from making the film. As Wikipedia said, those are not my words. And so what happened was that Samuel Fuller, who is, you know, we've talked about Samuel Fuller before, was the one who ended up directing the film. And so it's an interesting like filmography that Hanson has, and this involvement with a lot of like early neo-noirs as well, and the noir sort of milieu and thrillers and psycho thrillers and stuff like that. And it all sort of feeds into, I think, a lot of what LA Confidential is doing. And Ellroy's work in general, because LA Confidential, which I have not read, I've read a good bit of Ellroy's other books, which are like they're very intense, they're very plotty, they're huge, like large cast of characters, but very difficult to actually get right on film, as has been proven by some of the other adaptations. LA Confidential is one of the few films I think that really captures the voice that Ellroy has in his narratives, and is able to do it in this sort of riff on older noirs and then also on the hard-boiled genre in general.
I have not read any of Ellroy's work, so I don't have that comparison. You know, I don't have the ability to make that comparison and to really look at how good of an adaptation it is. What I will say, as a film fan, as somebody who saw this movie in 1997 and was just like blown away by it, I loved it so much. I think that one of the things it does very, very well, and we'll talk more about this as we go, but it really captures, obviously I didn't live through the 50s, I don't know, but I've watched a lot and I've read a lot, but it really captures sort of this LA on the cusp. Like we were talking about last week with Devil in a Blue Dress, where LA was on the verge of a major shift that would happen over the next 10 to 20 years. And would the echo of that would still linger into the 90s and even now. But so we've moved forward about 6 or 7 years from last week to this week. And we're really seeing how much I think these are such good companion pieces, because we're seeing how much the city has already changed in just a few short years. And this time it's really filtered through the lens of the LAPD. Yeah. And you have the story is centered on these three, oh gosh, sorry. Neighbor's starting up his car. Anyway, the story is centered on these 3 LAPD officers. You have other officers that come and go too. You've got the captain, you've got all these other players in it, but it's really, there's these 3 distinct people. So you've got Kevin Spacey playing Jack Vincennes, who is this, you know, he's a veteran cop. He's been around for a while. He's really caught up in the star power and his proximity to Hollywood. And he's obsessed with the fact that he is a technical advisor on this TV show. And that's the thing that really matters to him. He's on the take, you know, he's constantly getting bribes and stuff to set it, like, especially from a tabloid reporter who gets him to set up, you know, high profile arrests, that kind of thing. So you've got that guy, and then you've got the character that Russell Crowe plays, who is Bud White. Yes, thank you. And he is a younger officer who's got a chip on his shoulder because of his own life experiences, and he's generally a decent cop. He definitely wants to get the bad guys, but he's also one of those that he'll look the other way if somebody's doing something wrong for the right reasons. And then you've got Guy Pearce, who plays Ed Exley, who is also a younger cop, who is definitely a climber. He's very ambitious. His father was in the LAPD, and he is very much a rule follower. He does not see any good reason to plant evidence or to lie for a fellow officer or anything like that. What I think is interesting about these three officers is how all of them kind of go through some shifts and along the way. And you see where even someone like Ed Exley, who seems like, oh, he's a total straight arrow, he wouldn't do anything wrong. Like, he's still very much a misogynist. He's racist. Like, he's not perfect either. They all have their own problems. And I think that these three characters are so interesting, and they really do represent sort of these three different facets of the LAPD, and at least as we recognize the LAPD, and they all kind of represent this direction. Like, if the police department goes in any particular direction, it's gonna be one of these three ways. And which way will it be?
And they're all like, I think that they're, one of the things I really like about this film is that watching it, you're like, okay, it's sort of like, whose side are you on? It's like, no one's, but also theirs, but also not. Like, there are these incredibly flawed characters that do horrible things, all three of them, in different ways, and that have differing reactions to it. And I think that this is a feature of Ellroy's fiction, but it's also just a feature of these kinds of films where you've got these heroes that are not heroes, and they're not even really anti-heroes. They're like these just very complex figures that you don't agree with a large section of the time, but that their motivations and their philosophies and their viewpoints about their jobs and about life and about justice are very much in keeping, and they do have transformations. So, like, you know, for instance, Ed Exley, right? So we are kind of introduced to him. He's very clean cut. He's very like, I would never do something to undermine the LAPD. I would never take bribes. I would never, beat up a suspect that I knew, even though I knew they were guilty, you know, all of those things. So he's shown initially as this very straight arrow. And then fairly quickly, we also see that he's a climber. He is absolutely very politically savvy. He is perfectly willing to manipulate everybody in his path in order to get where he wants to go. And at the same time, he also doesn't lose that underlying motivation of he wants to do the right thing kind of thing, you know. And that becomes more and more complicated as the film goes on, because he's got these other flaws, because he's existing in a system that doesn't reward that, but that also he's trying to get ahead in at the same time. And so it's this really interesting sort of interplay that is going on among all three characters about their morality and about where they cross the line for themselves and are like, I need to look at my life and look at my choices. And they all do, and they're all very compelling to watch. I love this film for, and this is something I love about Ellroy's fiction as well, is that you sit there, you're like, these are terrible people, but I'm compelled by them and I want to understand them. And I do understand them. There's a sympathy towards them as well. They're not repulsive to watch. It isn't unpleasant. While at the same time, they are doing things you're just like, well, I do not approve of that. It's an interesting combination.
It really is. And I think that it speaks to the strength of the writing. This screenplay is really, really incredible and just impeccably done. But it's also the performances too. We have at the center, we have three really strong actors, which we're gonna talk a little bit more about that in a second. But you have three very gifted actors in Kevin Spacey, Guy Pearce, and Russell Crowe. And I think that just it really you have to be able, in order to watch a film like this where you do have such deeply unlikable people that you also are in a situation of having to root for, they give you that. And through their performances, it's not just, I mean, it has to be well written, but it also has to be actors that can give you some reason to connect with them. And I think all three of them do that. I think a lot about the show, and I was really thinking about this while you were talking. I was thinking about the show Succession, a show about really horrible people, a really horrible family. There is not a decent person among them. And yet, because of the actors and because they are so good at making you just absolutely hate them 1 second and then feeling kind of a little bit not bad for them, but understanding where they're at and why they're there. And having that little snippets of sympathy makes that show so compelling and so watchable over the course of seasons. While you're just watching them do terrible things, you're also like, okay, but I kind of get it, and that's how LA Confidential is to me too, where it's like all three of these guys, they're bad in their own way, but yet, like for example with Bud, we understand that he's not a great hero, but we also see, because of his own experiences watching, what happened in his own home as a child, and that motivates him to protect women, not always in the best way, and not absolute either, because there's a scene late in the movie where he smacks the crap out of Kim Basinger, but just knowing that he has this motivation and he has this inherent desire to protect people who cannot protect themselves makes him a character that's really interesting to watch.
And I think the character like Bud, he's used as a strong man, right? Like, he's not very smart,
right?
Although he just doesn't think that he is. But so he's not as intelligent as like Ed Exley, right?
But he's not the game player.
And he's not very smart, but he's used as this brute, right? This like, he's being used as the enforcer. He's beating people up. He like has severe anger management problems, but he even recognizes that in himself, and there's this bubbling anger, and the source of it is the death of his mother and the violence of his father. But that is also something that the police department specifically, and the corruption of the police department, have honed in him. They've taken this man who is predisposed because of his experience as a child to violence, and rather than like giving him therapy, right, rather than like in any way discouraging that or kind of giving him a different outlet for that anger, has basically honed the anger and the violence into something that they are using as like a blunt instrument effectively. And Bud, what is brilliant about Bud is that he recognizes that he knows how he's being used. And in fact, at one point he says, like, I became a cop in order to protect people like my mother, right? In order to like get the bad guys, right? That was basically the reason he became a cop, to get his dad. And what he's been doing has just been beating the shit out of people. Like for no, like, as like, oh well, they're bad guys. Just like, okay, but are they? Like, because he's just being told by his captain, beat the shit out of this guy. Like, and all three of the characters go through this moment where they're like, what am I doing and why am I doing it? How far have I departed from the reason that I became a police officer to begin with? And how much has the system itself corrupted me and changed me and made me lose sight of the actual point of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And I do find it interesting that the one character, we get explanations for both Ed and Bud of like, this is why I became a cop. And the one character who doesn't remember, literally says he does not remember why he did it, is Jack.
Yeah.
And he says it's in a conversation with Ed, and he's like, I don't remember. And it is this, and he's the one who's been the flashiest. He is basically using being a cop as a source of celebrity, and as a source of attention. But he comes to this point of like, why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm.
What is the point? And basically, I have a choice. I can either keep on doing this, or I can change it. I could try to do good. And we also see how that pans out for him.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about the Kevin Spacey of it all.
Kind of have to, don't you? Yeah. And I mean, 1997, most of what we now know about Kevin Spacey, we did not know. Although I think even then there was not that he was a sex pest, but there was a lot of conversation about his sexuality, and that was like it's something that feeds into his performances as well. And so even in 1997, there was this kind of, I don't know, confusion about who Kevin Spacey was. And sort of the way that people approached his characterizations and like the kind of roles that he played. Because he got what American Beauty is a couple years later, I think.
Yeah, 2000.
Yeah. So not that long.
Right. Yeah. Well, and yeah, I mean, at the time there was a lot of speculation. And like he would show up to awards shows with his mom and never with a date. In fact, most of his movies, there were some movies where he would be in relationships, but it really was never, he was never a romantic lead. He didn't take roles like that. In this movie, we never really see him in any sort of relationships or anything really either. Mm-hmm. It's not about that. He cares about the spotlight. He cares about having, all this attention and being the cool Hollywood guy. Yeah, but this is one of those movies we actually talked about not doing it because of Kevin Spacey. Because it is hard to talk about him now. Just like next week, we're going to be talking about Chinatown, and you can't talk about Chinatown without talking about Roman Polanski. And yeah, so it's tricky, but this is where, the idea, and we've talked about this, and we've talked about how sometimes it's just full bullshit too, the separating the art from the artist.
Yeah.
But when we look at a movie like LA Confidential, he's just one piece of it, and there's a lot involved in this story, and what he did on the outside had nothing to do with his character here, what he was doing in his private life.
Yeah.
And this film is still something that is an influential movie and also really captures exactly the time period that we're talking about. And so it's like, on the one hand, would we prefer not to have to talk about a Kevin Spacey film maybe ever again, or at least, not for a very, very long time, probably. But at the same time, this is a film you can't get around. You can't avoid it. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. And it's so well done that we shouldn't have to pretend it doesn't exist.
Well, and that's one thing. So like I even, I messaged you after I had watched it earlier this week. I was like, I hate how good Kevin Spacey is in this. Yeah. And he is. He's brilliant. Like all three of them are brilliant, honestly. And they all, it's very different characters, very different performances. Kevin Spacey is compelling. He is fascinating to watch. He has some of the best lines, honestly, in the whole film. He delivers them so well. One of my favorite scenes is still that little scene in the restaurant where they confront Johnny Stoppanato, and Ed is like, oh, hooker. He says to the woman, he's like, oh, hooker who looks like Lana Turner is still a hooker. And there's just this beat, and Jack says that is Lana Turner. Just like she is Lana Turner. That's Lana Turner.
Yep.
And it's funny. It's just very, very funny. A film that has a lot of violence and a lot of darkness and everything, he does lighten it a little bit.
He does. what sorry, just to jump in, but what I love about that scene is two things. How amused he is watching this guy just make a total fool of himself, and also what it tells us about Ed and how Ed is an asshole.
Yeah, no, exactly. Exactly, just a Lana Turner. And yeah, and so Spacey in this film is brilliant. He does a fantastic job. And also in a lot of ways, like I said earlier, this character in particular is the most enigmatic of the three. Yeah. Because he's very superficial. Initially, that's what we see. We see this like layer, right, of superficiality. But then, basically what happens is he winds up essentially sending this one kid to his death, right? And that is what sort of changes his perspective on the things that he's doing and begins to make him think about, why did I become a cop in the first place? Like, why am I doing this? So he is probably one of the most difficult to decipher and yet also morally complex characters in a very morally complex film. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's interesting. So I think that there is, and this isn't just because of the Kevin Spacey of it, but there is in the characterization of Jack this question mark around him. So that enigma and that question of like the thing that turns on everything is him basically entrapping this guy into like arresting him, photographing him in a gay interaction. And one of the things that I think is an undercurrent in Jack's characterization is that we don't know his sexuality. We do know Bud and Ed. It's very clear that they're both straight men. Mm-hmm. It's not clear when it comes to Jack. There isn't a romantic angle at it. The way that he relates to women is not particularly, it isn't the straight man performance that we see from a lot of the other men in the film. And so we get this ambiguity in him. And I think that Spacey brings that ambiguity and that question mark. Yeah. That sort of feeds into this characterization of Jack in a film that is all about superficiality and concealment, right? It's about how people look and what they, the image that they project to the world and what is actually going on beneath all of that. And not just the ugliness, but the confusion and the complexity of it. And Jack, in a lot of ways, is very representative of that angle of the film. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think when we look at when Jack is murdered by the captain, played by James Cromwell, it's interesting because it's like he's always been ambiguous. We're never quite sure. He doesn't seem to take his job very seriously, apart from what it can do for him on the film and TV side. But that scene really does show that he's also still a good cop, like not good like a good cop, but
he's smart.
Yes,
he can figure it out,
and he still does the job. He still takes the job more seriously than we might have thought he did.
Well, and there's again throughout there's this sense that like he was always a good cop. That's kind of like he was a good investigator. He could figure things out.
Smart. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then somewhere along the way, he basically stopped caring about that because he got sort of seduced by the image of the cop and the image of Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And that's like, and so we get that other element that is like feeding back into it is that at some point at the beginning of all of this, Jack was a very smart investigator.
Yeah.
And he's regaining that, and it ultimately winds up killing him.
Right.
But it's a really nuanced and varied performance, and Kevin Spacey does a great job. He is brilliant in this movie.
Yeah, he also is really good with some subtle things. He's so good with subtle facial reactions, and where there's a lot there. For example, I think one of the scenes that really stands out to me in that way is after the jailhouse brawl, basically, where somebody ends up shot. The cops are all involved, and the police are investigating, trying to get to the bottom of, if not what actually happened, what story they can tell to the public about what happened. And so Bud comes in. He's just kind of, well, this is how it is. Ed is very ready to throw his fellow officers under the bus, and is praised for that. And he's negotiating for a promotion. Basically, he wants to be a detective. That's what he cares about. And so he's negotiating. I will give you the real truth if you let me have this. And so then they send him aside to observe the next interrogation, which is with Jack. But what Ed has told them is the way to get Jack is to threaten his TV show. And that's exactly what they do. And it's interesting because he's sitting there like, oh, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything. Oh, well, we're going to suspend you and take your show away. And the look on his face, it's so quick, but you just see all of the emotion of that being taken away from him and how that affects him. And it's just, you just can read it before he ever says a word. And then he immediately is like, okay, I'll tell you whatever I need to tell you. I'll take the deal. But it's those very subtle facial reactions that Spacey is so good at. He was always so good at that. And I think that we see a lot of that throughout this film.
Yeah, very much so. And well, let's talk about that initial kind of inciting incident, as it were, because that's kind of the thing that gets everything rolling.
Right.
Because that's what launches Ed's career. It's what changes Bud's relationship to the force and everything. Because the whole process is like, so it's Christmas Eve. They're like a couple of cops who have been hurt in like a gang fight, right? And they bring in this group of men, Mexicans, who they say, right, the cops who are arresting them say, these are the guys that beat up, our officers. And we see kind of the progression of it, where you've got a bunch of drunk police officers who are then spinning stories, just like, it goes from they were hurt in the line of duty to they're on death's door, right?
Right.
And then they all descend to the prison cells to beat up this group of men, a group of prisoners, for hurting their fellow officers, right? And all of our main characters, so Jack, Ed, and Bud, are all involved in this. And they all take different roles as the scene goes on. Like, their loyalties change. And then the aftermath of that is not the LAPD looking and be like, hey, we've got a bunch of violent police officers who are willing to just beat the shit out of prisoners and can get away with it. But how do we spin this?
Right.
It's that superficiality. It's that image. They're trying to create a new image of the LAPD. And that's where it's all based in. And again, each of our main characters have a different reaction to it. And none of their reactions are good. None of them. Like, you've got Bud, who's like, I'm never going to rat out a fellow officer. It's just like, your fellow officers just beat the shit out of innocent people.
Yeah.
In a prison, right? And but there's this whole element of like loyalty and what people do and for what reasons. And Bud is destroying his own career, right, in the process. But he's also standing up for a bunch of officers that do not deserve to be stood up for. And he himself was involved in the attack.
Well, and he was kind of stirred into it because they used him to get involved, essentially.
Yeah. And so we get kind of the personalities, particularly of all of these three men, in very quick succession. And every single one of them is wrong. Like, none of them are doing right things for the right reasons.
Right.
Not a single one, including, and that includes the captain and the police commissioner and everybody else. The DA, they're all like, it's all this superficial. It's all like, how do we spin this? How do we make this acceptable? How do we pitch this to the public?
Right.
And that then, turns on this entire theme again of that superficiality of Hollywood and what things look like on the surface and what is really going on underneath, and even what's going on underneath even deeper than that. All of those layers that kind of the film peels back and makes the viewer very uncomfortable and very sort of, you can't come out and be like, oh, here's the good guy and here's the bad guy in this movie, really.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even by the end, where Ed, who's been made to look like he's the good cop who's willing to tell the truth he's not going to lie for the sake of justice. And even him in the end, he's willing to do what he needs to do to get ahead in his own career.
Yeah, he spins it.
Yep.
Like, you know, and we even hear him at the very end after the shootout, and like Jack is dead, a bunch of police officers are dead.
He kills the captain.
He kills the captain, like, who's massively corrupt. Who's like, I mean, the whole plot turns on the fact that the captain of this precinct in the LAPD was like taking over the heroin trade in LA.
Right.
Like, that's what's happening.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember when this was. 1 second. So it's, I don't know, I think it's interesting because this movie comes out in 1997. And the novel was published in 1990. But obviously there's been a lot of scandal and a lot of corruption in LAPD for many, many years. But the timing on this is really interesting because there was this huge scandal that erupted in the late 90s, where an entire not subdivision, but like an entire division of the LAPD, the Rampart division, all of this corruption, it was really bad. Like, all this revelation came out about a lot of the things that are actually happening in LA Confidential. And they were covering up, they were planting false evidence on suspects. They were massive police brutality. They were taking like helping themselves to some of the spoils of different crimes. They were involved in the drug dealing and stuff. Like, I mean, a lot of the things that happen in this movie were actually happening in the Rampart division. And it all started to really come out in 1997, actually. So it's interesting. It's like, so this movie, even though it's set in the 50s, it's such a commentary too on where the LAPD was in the year that it came out. Like, it was so relevant to that time period. I mean, this is now 5 years after the LA riots, which involved the police brutality against a person, Rodney King, and then the way that the police basically tried to just protect their own. But then there was so much scrutiny on LAPD after the Rodney King case and in the aftermath of the riots, that a lot of these stories and a lot of this corruption started to come to light. And so this movie being released when it's not just a fun look back at this, like, ooh, look at this seedy LA in the 1950s that looks all glamorous, but is actually this hotbed of just terrible, corruption and scandal. But it's also shining a light on what was really happening in the present day as well.
Yeah, well, it's like what we were saying about Devil in a Blue Dress, and the representations of racism and systemic racism within it, and within LA, within the LAPD, and kind of that continuum. And the best films like this that are set, in the 40s and 50s, say, are ones that are saying something about their specific time period, but they're using their time period. And honestly, this, like, I think it's important to think about the fact that the 1940s and the 1950s, post-war America in particular, is incredibly affluent, right? And is also incredibly racist and incredibly, like, it's that period that, so many of, like, the MAGA Republicans now look back on as like these halcyon days when everything was perfect, when it was like, and this film even begins with some of those images, with this image of the 1950s in LA and how wonderful it was and everything. And then we actually get this story that is about what is going on underneath the image. And I think we get the same thing in something like Devil in a Blue Dress. We're saying, like, this time that you're like, oh, wasn't it wonderful? It's like, no, it wasn't. And it's superficial. It's, glossing over all of the ugliness. It's pretending that the cops aren't corrupt, that they're not violent, that they're not, kind of out for themselves, all of this stuff, that justice is being served. You've even got Jack, who is he's on, so the show that he's an advisor for is Badge of Honor, which is basically like, Dragnet, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same thing. It's like, oh, it's these clean cut police officers, just the facts, man, all of that stuff. And it's an image, it's not real. And that's what the film is unpacking. And so you're also talking about in the 90s, like you say, in LA, it's like, it's an image.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't about concern for the actual people that are being harmed. It's concern for the image that the public is receiving of who the LAPD are and who the police department are. And this is all then wrapped up in this whole concept of Hollywood and the image. And we even get this in LA Confidential with the role that Kim Basinger plays, she's a prostitute who is made up to look like Veronica Lake. And she's part of this group of prostitutes run by this millionaire/pimp, millionaire businessman/pimp, played wonderfully by, what's his name? David Strathairn. And all of them are made up to look like movie stars, Rita Hayworth and Lana Turner and Marilyn Monroe and Veronica Lake, so that men can have this dream of sleeping with these starlets,
right?
And pretend that they are, they have this proximity to the image of these people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, LA is such a place.
Well, I think it's a good point that, so both this and Devil in a Blue Dress come out in the 90s. They come out during that period, during that relationship between the LAPD and the public and what people are seeing, right? And the corruption of LA generally, but particularly of the LAPD and the way that the LAPD is perceived.
Mm-hmm.
And the 90s in LA, yeah, that was like, so you're talking about the Rodney King verdict, the LA riots, like all of the scrutiny that was also on them during the O.J. Simpson case.
Yeah.
All of those things, it's all wrapped up in corruption and in image, and also, of course, in race. And we get we get some of that in this film. It doesn't turn on race in the same way as, certainly as something like Devil in a Blue Dress. But there are these occurrences where, you've got the Mexicans at the beginning who get beat up. You've got the group of young Black men who have done bad things, but not the bad things that they're being accused of. Right. And so then you get into this whole thing of like, the part of Ed's issue is, is it justice if it's not justice for the correct thing, right? So these men did not do what they're being accused of. They were falsely accused. They had evidence planted on them in order to protect the LAPD, mm-hmm. right? And to kind of sweep all of this under the rug. But they did also do horrible things.
Right. Yeah. They're not innocent. They're just not guilty of what they're accused of doing.
Yeah. Yeah. But part of his horror is that he's done all of this. Again, he's done exactly what he said he wouldn't do, mm-hmm. which was, will you plant evidence? Will you do what needs to be done, right, as it were, in order to stop someone that is guilty? And what he finds out is he thought they were guilty. He didn't know it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a good film. So it really was nominated for 9 Academy Awards. It won 2. Do you know which 2 it won?
Best Screenplay?
Did win Best Screenplay, yes.
I don't know what else.
Best Supporting Actress, Kim Basinger.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, she is very good.
Yeah, she really is. It was also nominated for art direction, cinematography, directing, film editing, original score, best picture, and sound. And Jerry Goldsmith was actually nominated for the score for that. He was nominated for, I think, 14 Oscars overall and only won once.
Wow.
Yeah, he also did the score for Chinatown and was nominated for that. which we'll be talking about next week. But that's not the movie he won for. Do you have any guesses what Jerry Goldsmith won his one and only Oscar for?
No, this is like way beyond my capacity.
The Omen.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
My memory is that that's a good soundtrack. So yeah,
It is a very good soundtrack. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So it did not win Best Picture. I remember it very much being in the conversation, but nothing was gonna beat that year's Best Picture winner, which was
Titanic.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing stood a chance.
Yeah, 97, like you said before we recorded, like, why didn't this win? Oh, 97.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, I mean, that was a pretty competitive year. So, Best Picture that year, it was obviously Titanic, and L.A. Confidential. The other nominees were As Good as It Gets, The Full Monty, and Good Will Hunting. So
that's an interesting lineup, actually.
Yeah. So anyway, just a little bit of trivia for you. So any final thoughts about L.A. Confidential?
I did just want to mention very, very quickly the whole milieu. So apparently Curtis Hanson had his actors actually watch films like In a Lonely Place and The Bad and the Beautiful, which shows up on the marquee a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it's one of the films that's being shown. Kiss Me Deadly. So all of those are these noirs that, he's trying to get that sort of feel into. And I think that that's something that he manages really well, is that it does feel like this is the reality of LA in, the 1950s. And like that the gauziness and the brightness and the beauty and the ugliness at the same time. It doesn't feel superficial. It feels very lived in. And I think that's one of the reasons why this is such a good film, is that it's not set dressing. And it's also not just aping like old noir or anything like that. It's very much feeling like you're embedded in this real space. And that the characters are living within it and are interacting with it in a really meaningful way that stretches beyond a stage or something like that. It's very, very well done. It's great set design. The suits, the dresses, the houses, everything just works really, really well. And I quite like that about the film.
Yes, it's so good. I have nothing to add to that. So, all right. I think that's going to wrap things up for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Like we mentioned, next week we will be talking about Chinatown from 1972. Yeah. Is that right?
I think so.
I think 1972. Anyway, that one. But before we do that, we would like to thank our patrons for helping keep the show going and keeping it ad-free. They are Abby, Audra, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Ferdinand, Heather, James, Judy, Carriotta, Matt, Michelle, MK, Monty, Nanina, Noel, Robert, Roxy, Steve, and Sharon. If you would like to join them and become a patron too, you can go to patreon.com/citizendame and sign up. And there you get early access to our regular episodes. You also get bonus episodes. We'll have a new one very, very, very soon, I promise. And you also just get to know that you're helping support feminist film criticism. If you don't want to sign up for anything, but you want to help contribute, you can also go to our Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/citizendame. And then other ways to find our work, you can go to our website, citizendamepod.com. You can also, by the way, if you want to email us, you can do that at citizendamepod@gmail.com. And you can find us on social media. On Instagram and Blue Sky, we are at citizendamepod, and on Letterboxd, we are at citizendame. We can also be reached individually. Lauren, where are you?
I am on Instagram and Letterboxd at LH Business.
And I am on Instagram, Letterboxd, and Blue Sky at Karen M. Peterson. And that is going to wrap things up this week. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Unless you came here to wipe my ass, I believe we're through. I don't pull that good cop, bad cop crap. I practically invented it. So what if some homo actor is dead, huh? Boys, girls, 10 of them get off the bus to L.A. every day. Pull him off me, X-Lady! I don't know how.
Now, I know you think you're the #1 hotshot, but here's the juice. If I take you out, 10 more lawyers will take your place tomorrow. They just won't come on the bus, that's all.